The public has been sort of gaslit time and again by a lot of these news organizations who will insist that actually what they're doing is entirely fair and that this is what journalism is. Well, it isn't.
What does it mean to hold an institution accountable, especially when that institution is a media organization owned by the public? My name's Ariana, and I've spent the last 10 years working at the intersection between music and social justice. I'm your host at Sounds Like Change, and this is the podcast where we interview artists and change makers who share our belief that music can play an important role in social change. It is an absolute pleasure to introduce you to today's guest, Karishma Patel. Karishma is a powerful voice at the intersection of journalism, advocacy and storytelling. Karishma is a former broadcaster with the BBC who left due to the BBC's bias over the coverage of Gaza. She's a committed anti-racism campaigner, and she's a fearless commentator on issues of justice, inequality and human rights. She's also a piano player and opera singer, and this intersection of storytelling through music and journalism is one of the reasons I was so excited to get her on the podcast today. So in today's episode, we're going to be exploring how storytelling, identity and music intersect. We'll be looking at things like impartiality and truth in the media, and how memory can be transformed through sound. Now, every episode, I ask guests the same question, which is, what song most faithfully captures the world that you want to help build and why? Karishma's choice was Sospiri by Elgar. So Karishma, thank you so much for joining Sounds Like Change. The song that you just chose, and we've just listened to, Sospiri by Elgar. Why did you choose this song?
I mean, firstly, I think it's a masterpiece that not many people know about. And I think everybody is really impacted by it whenever they do actually hear it. So Elgar wrote this adagio in 1914. So it was before World War I. It was, an incredibly different world and a very different England. And the word Sospiri means sighs in Italian. And it's something I think you can hear in the piece, because the piece, involves strings, it involves harp, it involves the organ, and you can feel this kind of yearning, this building, this sense of climax, basically. And I think it's really, really beautifully, really sumptuously, romantically done. And I think what appeals most to me is that sense of gradual building, gradual climax, and is the sense of movement and repetition that also exists in the piece. And I think that it's basically yearning again and again for that big moment with all of the strings. So I just think it's a piece I keep on going back to, and actually I think it really grounds me. And you'll often find me listening to that actually if I am out walking in nature, in the English countryside, in woodland trustland, because I think he's sort of also captured the kind of grandness and beauty of the natural world within that piece as well.
And I think what really came, for me when I listened to that track is a sense of awe and a sense of, connecting to that feeling of awe when the strings come in. And yeah, I really love that sort of build. And there's lots of even scientific research around the creation of a sense of awe and mental health benefits. So I enjoyed that a lot. Thank you so much for sharing that. Am I right as well that you play the piano? So I guess music is a part of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Music is a massive part of my life. So I not only play the piano, I have a grade 8 in opera singing, classical singing. So from the age of 11 until 18, I was doing musical grades in singing, and then at a certain point, I decided to pick up the piano because it's a very good kind of bass instrument to have. But I think for me, singing, but also playing the piano, I think it's a really good way to sort of center yourself within your body because there's all of this coordination. When you're singing, it's all about your breathing and your posture and all of these other things. When you're playing the piano, again, it's about your posture. It's about using the pedals and having a sort of smoothness and elegance in how you're moving your fingers. And I think I've always found it really therapeutic for that reason, but also because because I'm musical and I play these instruments, I found my way into composing music. And
Wow.
one of the more recent pieces of music I've shared, I don't normally share what I write because I find it's all quite personal. But I found myself in front of a Steinway. And obviously, if you find yourself in front of a Steinway, you have to play the piano.
Of course,
And so I found myself in front of a piano, and it was at a loved one's wedding, and there was just a moment where this piano was in front of me in this gorgeous venue. And I sort of sat down, and then I found myself playing part of a piece I'd written in November 2023, which, it's a really long time ago. And it was, a month after the genocide had started. And it was a piece that I wrote at the time because I was looking at a website called Queering the Map. I don't know if you know it, but it's a website where queer people from across the world can just write these anonymized messages and it location tags them. So it's a really beautiful resource. It's a lovely place it's a lovely website to go to just to get a sense of how people are feeling, what they're thinking, leave love notes. And in November 2023, I saw some news stories about the kinds of messages being left there in Gaza. And people were leaving love notes across the strip for, people they wished that they had been romantic with, people they loved but had lost, people they were looking for and couldn't find. I think it struck me so much. And I, at the time, I do a lot of writing as well, but at the time I just couldn't find words, but I could find the notes. So I wrote a piano piece, and that's what came out while I was sat there. And my sister recorded it, and then I ended up actually posting that one.
That's so beautiful. And music really is this way of metabolizing emotion. I mean, that's what the fundamentals of music therapy are all about, metabolizing emotion and feelings that can't be expressed through language, but can through song, through music, and even shared singing. But I'd love to know, maybe going back to your childhood, was there a first moment where music or a song just did something to you and you felt a shift and you felt connected?
I grew up around a lot of music. So my dad, back in the day when he was a younger man, was a DJ
Cool.
on the sort of London scene. So I grew up listening to lots of 80s music, dance tracks, that sort of thing. But actually, I found my own way into, very different genres of music. I really love, romantic era classical music, neo-romantic music. I love choral music, obviously, because I'm an opera singer. So I love listening to, Thomas Tallis and that sort of thing, early modern music. I love all of that. But the other music I think I grew used to hearing was sort of, or I think the commonality between all of the music I love is actually that it's all really soulful. And I think all of it includes aspects of that sort of yearning feeling that you get from listening to the Elgar piece. And I think soulful music, it can be anything from romantic era orchestral music to an Olivia Dean song. And I think that's, my musical taste definitely spans that. But yeah, when I was growing up, I was exposed to lots of different things. So yeah, 80s music, obviously South Asian music, Bollywood films, and not just the modern ones, but there are these beautiful, like yearning melodies from 1960s Bollywood films. And I think it was the kind of golden era of that kind of music. And there are they're just stunning, these stunning songs, usually sung by Lata Mangeshkar. So she she was known as the kind of Nightingale of India because she had this beautiful voice, and she was the one who sang a lot of those songs. And yeah, I think she just has such like gorgeous clarity of tone, and it's something that I try to bring into my opera singing, or always did.
Oh, that sounds so incredible. And I absolutely love how it's shaped so much of your childhood. And I mean, you know, music is a communication tool as well. And I guess it has been for thousands of years. We've carried stories through song, maybe even carried stories through song more than any other communication medium. So it is interesting that you're also a journalist. And so that communication is still, it's there, it's sort of almost in your DNA. And I'd love to know, you know, what are your thoughts on how music has been a part of communicating some of these big topics that we have needed to communicate in recent years, topics around truth and justice?
Yeah, I think music is actually one of the first things you'll notice if you go to a protest, especially all of the Palestine protests. You know, people are chanting, people are singing, there are drums, there's rhythm, there's a kind of coming together around the rhythms of a song or a chant. And I think it's a key way to build community. And, you know, you'll see it at a protest, but, you know, you'll also see it at musical events and things like that. There are lots of musical artists who sort of weave political messaging into their work, or who, you know, talk about politics between singing this song and that song. Because I was at Ali Pali during the summer for a gig, and I was listening to Leon Bridges, and there are a few other acts there, and more than one of them brought up Palestine, more than one of them brought up Sudan. And, you know, it wove very naturally into the kind of soulfulness, the human connection in their music. So I think it's a big part of that. And then we've had really overt political music, you know, like Hind's Hall, for example. I think that track has become the sort of soundtrack to a lot of the bravery, a lot of the protests that's happened around Palestine. And, you know, you'll hear that song everywhere and everybody knows all of the lyrics. And again, it's this kind of coming together. So I think music's really, really central.
And it's sort of, it almost always, usually, undeniably transfers truth as well. And maybe that's why the messages land so fiercely within audiences, because truths can be shared maybe in a way that other media can't or doesn't for different reasons. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's an expressiveness within music, but also a sort of non-linguistic expressiveness. So you can communicate the largeness of a really abstract emotion without having to define exactly what it is. And I think there's something really freeing in that, because I think when I was writing that piece in November 2023, I didn't at the time have the exact words, but I had the sense of what I was feeling. And it was this sense of deep sadness at the yearning I was seeing, deep sadness at the fact that there were lots of people in Gaza who couldn't just continue to live their lives now that Israel was attacking them. And all of that came out via music. So I think it offers a different kind of space. But, you know, also at the time, it was the case that if I'd wanted to maybe post something about that piece of music, even while being a BBC journalist under its impartiality rules, I still might have been able to, whereas I don't think I'd have been able to write something from the heart.
No, that makes perfect sense. So speaking about your role with the BBC and everything that happened, for audience members that don't know, Karishma left the BBC due to institutional, essentially, bias and Israel bias in its coverage of Israel and Palestine over the past couple of years. And we have, and you mentioned now, the impartiality that a lot of, I guess, media institutions speak of. But where does the crossover of impartiality and truth, where does that get muddled up? Because something's not right here, if that's a fair assessment.
I think everyone's noticed that something's not quite right. I think what goes on essentially is that neutrality optics will get in the way. And when I talk about neutrality optics, I mean all of the things that the people at the top of somewhere like the BBC will do to seem fair and impartial to certain groups or to the government. And naturally, that really muddies what journalists are trying to do, because the core of a journalist's work is to, gather evidence, come to reasonable conclusions and present them to the public, in a really holistic way with all the right context, with all the right analysis. And, we're looking for fairness, we're looking for accuracy. I don't think anyone can argue that those aren't reasonable things to want to achieve. But, time and time again, we've seen people at the top of the BBC essentially cater to or, cave to external influences that are actually really obstructing that process. So, there was the whole saga with the Gaza medics documentary, really brilliant piece of journalism that Channel 4 ended up having to air because the BBC, after months of back and forth, eventually decided, for no good editorial reason, that they just wouldn't air it. And that was after so many BBC journalists had sort of put their heart and soul into this documentary and done a lot of work. Now, you can see there really clearly that there's no real and fair reason not to air a documentary like that. And in fact, they just sort of caved to external influence, and it really obstructed the sort of journalistic process. So I think that in part that's what's going on. And in fact, impartiality, I think the concept has become really, really muddied. And I'm not sure how useful it is in its current state, because there are lots of people who will, I think Robbie Gibb in Parliament said that impartiality was in his bones or something like that. When in fact, he, among others, at the BBC, there are concerns that they're compromised in different ways or have conflicts of interest. So I think the word is being sort of bandied around. I don't think a lot of people really know what it means. I don't think a lot of people really understands what it should entail. And I think actually it might be much easier for us all to go back to certain core tenets around, pursuing evidence and ensuring that the coverage is accurate and trying to put together something to give to the public that we can reasonably call truth, I think maybe we need to really get back to those values. And I think the public has done a really good job of sort of demanding that the BBC go back to those values rather than hiding behind this really muddied, confusing interpretation of impartiality.
And you left the BBC because of this issue and because of the bias. And I guess there are a lot of people who also work for complicit organisations that they feel similarly, but they are not going to leave, and they are not, they have not spoken up, and they have not maybe done sometimes as much as they wish they could or they want to. That's, in my opinion, not necessarily an excuse, but I would love to know why you think that is. Why did you, and there are lots of other people who took a stand and, either left or sort of, stood up for what is right, and why some people are just not and are part of the deafening silence?
Yeah, it's a complex question. So in terms of my story, I was working day in and day out on Gaza for months, and I became a sort of Middle East specialist for my team. And it was very clear to me, very quickly what was going on and what the evidence was showing. And I looked at all of it and I spoke to experts, and it was very clear that this was a genocide being perpetrated very early on. And, I looked around and I realized that my news organization wasn't reflecting that reality. And that when I talk about that reality, I'm talking about, the scale, the disproportionality, the illegality of Israel's actions. And, efforts weren't really being made to communicate all of that. So eventually what I chose to do is to sort of fight back, to organize internally so that it was made very clear to lots of very senior people at the BBC that there are journalists within this organization who don't agree with how this is being covered, many of whom are working on the story actively. And I kind of made it my mission for about a year to make that very clear and to push for editorial change, to push for the coverage to be a lot better. But ultimately, it didn't really work because, I was fighting against a lot of institutional and structural issues. So I think I got to the point where I realized that the best thing I could probably do was to leave and speak more openly. And, I've been trying to do that as best I can. I give speeches, I do panels, I do interviews, I write pieces. And I think a voice like mine needs to exist because the public has been sort of gaslit time and again by a lot of these news organizations who will insist that actually what they're doing is entirely fair and that this is what journalism is. Well, it isn't. As for those who stay, I think I've always advocated for a sort of double-pronged approach where there are people on the outside speaking really openly, but also good people on the inside who continue to sort of fight those battles internally. There are certain things that can only be done by people who are within these organizations. So some people choose to stay and to do that and to push through the really good work that they are creating. Because at the end of the day, the BBC online page gets, millions and millions of eyes on it and will continue to. So I want there to be good journalists who are still trying to get good things on there. But for a lot of other people, I think there's a sort of combination of financial concerns, career concerns, and things like that come together and that mean, some people won't even anonymously sign a letter. Mm. And, that I have a much harder time contending with or understanding. I know lots of people who, for different reasons, have to stay in these organizations, but, they do try to fight back. And then there are plenty of people who stay and, they're just sort of prioritizing their career progression and whatever else. And so they don't speak up because, there will ultimately be consequences. Of course, there will be. So I think, there are different sorts of people who are choosing to stay, essentially.
And this is a question that I personally have had for a very long time, and I'm wondering if you might have an answer to it. I know that people are getting fired for speaking up against Israel for, I know that people get fired for it. So, I can see that people want to prioritize their jobs or maybe they feel they can't. But anti-Zionist beliefs are a protected belief clause under the Equality Act in the UK, not in the US, not in Germany. I completely understand it's, quite unique to the UK at the moment, but that is now in our law. And as much as there are many parties and lobbies trying to eradicate it, it is there. So people cannot get fired for anti-Zionist beliefs or speaking up against Israel. And if they are, then they could essentially sue their workplace. So I've always thought, if I were working at a big organization and I were to get fired, then that's almost a really good chance for me to then go and make a really big deal out of suing the workplace. So I would love to know your opinion. Why do people not know about this? Why do you think this hasn't, I guess, helped the movement?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that ultimately there are different categories of consequence for being what I'm going to call a problem in the workplace. And I think if you continue to raise concerns, however legitimate they are, even if they're not about your protected beliefs, even if they're just concerns with editorial policy, if you become somebody who continues to raise concerns, I think you do get framed as a sort of problem. And I think it then becomes less likely that that you can progress within that space. I think a lot of people have found that to be the case in different ways. I know some people who have left certain major newsrooms because they kept on raising concerns, and then they found themselves being coded as, over emotional or incapable of being a journalist at an impartial news organization. So I think your life can be made very hard. You can be sort of gaslit. And I think that's another kind of category of consequence that is, it's not quite getting fired, but that definitely does happen. Because I remember, I pitched Hind Rajab's story a few times, and I was taken aside by someone senior, and I was told that I might be too emotionally attached to the story, that it might be time to let Gaza go. And I was told that I needed to maintain my impartiality. Now, as far as I was concerned, I was being a really good journalist by essentially clocking onto a story that my team didn't know about at the time. And as we know, it's a massive story. Hind Rajab's story is huge. And, it's not just that. She was a little girl and she deserved that coverage. But yeah, I think my ability to do my job was questioned. And that then made it really hard for me to be in the newsroom.
And have you built a strong community out of other journalists who have similar values or maybe have been in similar positions? I'd love to know, how that journey has been for you along the way, meeting people and building a community of like-minded people.
Yeah, I think it's been much better than I thought it would be. I don't think anybody quite knows what happens when you leave a really prestigious career at quite a young age. It is a risk to take. But I have met so many wonderful social justice focused people, so many people who are questioning how journalism is done and exploring other ways to do it, movement journalism, community journalism. There are so many sort of grassroots, indigenous, different types of journalism that do exist. And I've met so many really wonderful people who are considering better forms of journalism for underserved communities. And as soon as I left, I had so many people reaching out to me and offering help, offering advice, offering to go for a coffee. I think that there is an entire community that does exist to sort of catch you if you leave somewhere like the BBC for the right reasons. And, I very much found that to be the case. And I think I'm really energized by all of the people, all of the journalists, all of the people in the wider kind of media sector, in the sort of nonprofit social justice sector. I'm so sort of energized and inspired by them, and all of the work that they are doing. And there are so many really fruitful conversations that I have with different journalists about, upcoming podcasts, projects, entire newsrooms and news outlets. There are so many things on the horizon. And I think the alternative media landscape is just growing and growing and growing. And I think seeing that has been, one positive thing. And I think that, in 5 years, it's going to be, the alternative media landscape is going to be even better. And there will be even more jobs, and there will be even more options for young journalism students, because so many of them come to me and they say, I wanted to work at the BBC because I believe in public service. And that's echoing me, because that was me, and I believed in public service and I believed in good journalism. So where do you go? You go to the BBC. And they basically say, that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be you. And, I agree with everything you've done and your reasons for leaving, but, what does that mean for me? Where should I go? And, I usually advise the alternative media space. And, I'm hoping that in about 5-10 years, there will be so much more on offer there.
I think that's a really powerful message that you've just shared, that there are so many people who feel they feel like if they were to maybe stand up or do something different or be a bit of an outlier in especially quite a corporate or institutional space, they're then going to be completely ostracized. But it sounds like from your experience, you've had this community hold you and you've now gone into a new terrain in a way. And that to me feels very hopeful. And I think that's a very positive message for anyone that might be in a similar position that you were in a couple of years ago. And I guess, you just mentioned the alternative media space that you mentioned. Sorry, this isn't my world. So I'd love to know what that means and what do you see the landscape, how do you see the landscape changing over the coming years?
Yeah, this is a great question. So we've seen lots of these. So when I'm talking about alternative media, I'm talking about these sort of smaller news outlets, even Substacks and things that have sort of cropped up to fill a need, to fill a gap that's been left because mainstream media hasn't been covering the genocide properly at all. And there are massive audiences that have just sort of turned away from the BBC, from Sky, from all of them. And they were looking for news outlets that they could trust to tell them what was really going on. And they found themselves looking at, Declassified UK, for example. They've been doing brilliant investigative work around Israel, around Britain's participation in the genocide, work that the BBC should really have been doing. There should have been big documentaries looking into Britain's participation. Not so. So we have Declassified and they've been doing amazing work. We have places like Zateo that Mehdi Hassan started. And there are lots of different examples like that, smaller news outlets, new news outlets that have been created to sort of fill a need. And now they are really thriving. And they are, they're covering Gaza really well. They're also moving beyond that. And I think that they are going to fill a really important role for us as the public, especially with the rise of reform and the sort of strength of the far right. I think we need that alternative media landscape. And like I said, I also mean Substacks. I also mean, for example, Owen Jones's Substack or his YouTube channel. There are lots of journalists who've actually also now found the audience, found the room to start things like that. And those projects are also really fruitful. So I think for most people now, there are finally real options. You don't have to go to Sky. You don't have to go to the BBC. And if you feel like a story is not being covered properly, there will be other places you can go to see, a different way of covering that story.
Do you think that media and journalism is becoming more decentralized?
Yeah, I do think that that's happened partly because of social media. Social media is a bit of a boogeyman in the world of journalism because it does make things harder in terms of, disinformation and that sort of thing. But there's a whole positive element to it wherein, people can create their own news channels. People can be making TikToks about certain news stories. And, obviously what that means is that sometimes people who are not journalists are creating content. But actually what we've seen over the past few years is that loads of Palestinian journalists have used social media to get their journalism out there. Instagram Reels, Twitter, or X. But yeah, Palestinian journalists have been using social media to get their really brilliant journalism out there. And so it's become this, this invaluable resource. And then you have alternative media outlets also really using social media well especially to get to younger audiences and diverse audiences. So I think that's part of this move toward a more decentralized media space. Because, frankly, I don't want a media space where we only have, the BBC, Sky and ITV. I want a kind of diversity of media outlets so that I can go around and have a look at different things. And I think that's quite important.
No, absolutely. And on a kind of similar topic, having said all this, what do you think the definition of journalism is?
Let's see. I think it has a few different aspects to it. So I think at its core, journalism is about the sort of labor of evidence gathering, truth finding, reality finding. But I also think that it's about being part of this robust forces state. So it's about accountability and justice, and all of that. So part of the reason that you are seeking truth and seeking reality is so that you can provide the public with, information, with accountability. But yeah, I think it means that people are able to be participating members of their democracy. So it means that, they may see something, published by a news outlet, an investigation, and it might make them vote differently. It might make them turn up to a mass protest. And I think that, the fact that so many major news organizations haven't covered the genocide properly means that actually we've got a massive sort of knowledge gap, a sort of knowledge hole, as the British public, in terms of what our own government has done, in terms of what Israel has done. And that's incredibly concerning, because it means people aren't well enough informed to take whatever action they think is appropriate to take. They don't understand the extent to which our government has participated. Even right now, there just isn't much news coverage of the members of Palestine Action who are on hunger strike. And again, people therefore aren't enough informed about how the state is using its powers. And they therefore can't sit and consider whether or not they agree with it. And I think that's everyone's right.
So yeah, moving on now on to how you look after yourself. We've spoken a little bit about music and piano and opera, and it's so beautiful that you have that as a part of your life. Is there anything that you do to either resist burnout or just to look after yourself generally, especially in amongst so much intensity within your work as a journalist and as an activist working in, such heavy terrain?
It's difficult. I'm not always the best at it either. I'm going to openly admit that I'm a very, hyper-productive, fairly type-A sort of person. But I do have a list of things that I try to do as much as possible. So, music is part of that. So just taking time and space to compose or to play the piano or to do something like that or to sing in a choir, that's definitely one thing. I also write. So I keep what I would loosely call a diary, but really I just get my thoughts down, or try to describe things I'm trying to get my head around. And I think that really helps. I'll also kind of go for a long walk in a green space, listening to Elgar or whoever else, Vaughan Williams. I'm into my my sort of English romantic era music, so I do that. And then actually one of my favorite things, so I'm reasonably green fingered, and I have a small orange tree. And actually taking care of plants.
So nice.
Centers me. Yeah, and she's doing surprisingly well at the moment, despite the fact it's winter. She's growing oranges. There are about 7 or 8 of them.
That's so lovely. And everything to do with nature is so important. We're so disconnected in our society, especially living in a city. I've always thought that kind of being in a city is a bit like almost like living on a scab of the earth. We're sort of like disconnected by all this concrete. So yeah, that's lovely that you have that.
Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things.
Now, I would love to know how you think our culture needs to shift in order for us to build a fairer world.
I think at the moment people are very sort of alienated from each other, and there's a lot of division. There's a lot of really divisive rhetoric, especially coming from the far right. And I think that a lot of the work that we all need to do in the social justice space, the leftist space, is actually about bringing people together, about finding that core sense of community that I think has been quite lost because we're all really atomized. And, when I say bringing together, I also mean, politically, people actually finding ways to work together, even where they may disagree over certain things. But I also just want to see more sort of neighborly behavior, more sense of local community that's healthy, and not the sort of divisive, xenophobic sense of local community that someone like Nigel Farage is trying to sell to people. So I want us to basically find this sort of healthier sense of community in Britain, and really foster that, because that can be something really beautiful.
Community, it really is. I feel like it's part of the missing link at the moment. We're in a very, very divided society, and I'm personally seeing so many communities rise up almost like out of the ashes of turmoil and despair, and people are coming together. So yeah, I completely agree with you. And I'd love to know, what does solidarity mean to you when we're trying to build this better world? How do people truly show solidarity with the causes and the work that matters to make a better world?
I think solidarity, it means so many things. One of my favorite quotes, and I'm not sure who said it, but one of my favorite quotes is that solidarity is love made political. And it's actually the reason I wear this necklace, because it's the word hub, so it's love in Arabic. And I wear it for that reason, because I like to remember that quote, because actually solidarity is not that different from the love that you have for, your sister or your partner or whoever it is that's in your life on an interpersonal level. It's about trying to expand that sense of love, that sense of care, into a kind of radical empathy that will even extend to, a young mother in Gaza, that will even extend to somebody in Sudan, that will even, it will just extend outward. And it means that you can really connect and that you can really care. And I think that's a really important part of what solidarity is. It's also a lot of work. And one of the things that I've discovered over the past few years, especially, in becoming a bit of a leader and an organizer, is that, there's a lot of unglamorous work. There's a lot of admin. There's a lot of putting meetings together. There's a lot of convincing people to get on, and being a bit of a diplomat. There's a lot of work behind, this word solidarity. And sometimes it means having really difficult conversations with people. And sometimes it means having to make really difficult decisions. But again, that's a big part of it. And I think having that radical empathy keeps you going and sort of keeps you focused on what the real goal is. So yeah, bit of a multi-layered answer, but that's what it is for me.
That's so beautiful. And I really see the link between love and solidarity and community. They almost all go hand in hand. And I think a lot about, there's various activists who have been sharing the message of I'm trying to get the quote right, that everyone wants a village, but no one wants to be a villager. And what you mentioned about, building community or being in solidarity is work. It's sometimes tedious. And that's just also what being in community is like. It's not always going to be easy. It's going to feel difficult sometimes, but that's part of what life is like, living together and being in unity with each other.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely that. And I think the other aspect is also that solidarity can mean that you are putting certain things at risk. And that's another important element of it. Obviously I put my career at risk and then I essentially threw it away. But, solidarity will also sometimes demand that of you, and really radical love and radical empathy will sometimes demand that of you. And I think the best thing you are placed to do, that's going to look really different depending on who you are. But real solidarity is about doing the work of also figuring that out and sort of considering your privilege and thinking about what you're really best placed to do, and then ideally doing it.
That's such an important message. And what message would you give to people who are, they might be young journalists, or they might be in any sector, and they want to do good work. They want to be living in alignment with their purpose. They want to be supporting justice causes. They do care, but for all of the reasons that we know, they just haven't. What is a message, or they're scared? Do you have a message for those people?
I think my message is that it's not too late. And there are still things that you can do now. So if you feel compelled to act, if you are looking around you and you are seeing things that are very clearly wrong, there is still time now for you to do good things within the journalism space. If you, for example, are a journalist in a mainstream newsroom, there are actually lots of really useful things you can do, and you can do them right now. So I would recommend reaching out to, somebody like me or another journalist who's taken a path like mine, to just get some advice on what you can do next and the kinds of organizations and communities you can actually get involved with. Because while they may not have existed 2 years ago, they definitely exist now.
Thank you for that. Now, the last question that I ask all guests is, 100 years from now, what message do you hope reaches our collective descendants?
I think the message I hope reaches them is, it's a message coming from a really fraught and chaotic time, which is the time that we're in. And I think the message I would want to send is that even if the world looks very bleak, it's really important you keep on building and finding hope, and that you see hope and that you see solidarity as verbs, as things you have to continuously build and continuously reproduce. I don't know what the world will look like. I'm going to have to assume it won't be a lovely utopia. But there are always shrubs in a wasteland, and I'm hoping that people learn to sort of nurture those shrubs into something sustainable.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Karishma, and thank you for being on Sounds Like Change.
Thank you so much for having me.
So that was the end of our interview with Karishma Patel. I say our interview. I had very little to do with it apart from being in the room, hitting record, making sure that things were working. I'm Sean Adams from Drowning Sound. We produce the Sounds Like Change podcast. And I'm chatting with Ariana after post-match analysis. How did you find your conversation with Karishma?
Oh, gosh. Well, firstly, I want to say as a producer, you are definitely doing a lot. So I don't want to, underplay that at all. But I adored the conversation with Karishma. She is such she's such a breath of fresh air. She's honest. She's, got so many interesting insights. She's so clear with her moral, intention and code. And I think she's a huge inspiration as well for other people that are either in similar industries or who are working in big institutions, which, let's be honest, is the majority of us, and how they can navigate that more effectively. So I absolutely loved speaking with her.
I think the one word takeaway for me was integrity. And having worked at the BBC, I feel like I've met BBC journalists that are very similar, who have such integrity and believe in journalism to be something which is more than just towing the line to power. Kowtowing. Where does that? I don't even know where that word comes from.
Cowering and towing. Yeah.
Yeah, it probably is, isn't it? But I think there's something about the way in which she's obviously made such a big life decision to stand up in the way that she did. And I think that, I mean, I've met her a few times, which is why I suggested her as a guest for the podcast, because I found just listening to her talk really inspiring. But I had no idea when I first suggested her that she's like opera singer, piano player, like loves classical music, like how big a role music's played in her life. So, and I think, I can't remember if we included it in the episode or if it was after we finished recording, but she was talking about how the video of her playing piano on her Instagram was like, had such a different reaction to all the other things she's put out. And I hope that when people start to hear this episode, they start to get a real better sense of who she is, because there's loads of great clips of her standing in her power and talking to people like Owen Jones and speaking at kind of events. And I saw a clip of her not long before we recorded this outro with her speaking. She's now an ambassador for Amnesty International. And all of those things are so impressive. But I think that I'm more impressed by her as a person, having listened to her in this conversation and learning so much more about her.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there are so many people that we will see on either social media or, you know, on TV or wherever. And you think, oh, wow, this is a, you know, incredibly successful, fierce campaigner for justice who's out there kicking doors down. And I think maybe a lot of people might feel a bit intimidated by that and think, well, that's not what I'm like. I'm not that kind of person. So maybe that means that, you know, so that's why I think it's so important to show and be open about the, I don't know if softer side is the right word, but those small things that we do that connect us to our sense of self. And it's like how when you're really vulnerable on social media, that can usually have a much more resonant reaction with audiences, because people see the human in all the work, even though all the work is also the human. But that balance is really nice. And I love what she was saying towards the end about, you know, a key way she looks after herself is by tending to her orange tree. How nice is that, to have this lovely small piece of nature that you're just tending to and looking after and watching grow. And I think it's those quiet moments that can help us feel so much more connected to a person, and also should prove to everyone listening that, you know, everyone is a balance of multiple things at once. Nobody is just this one thing that you might see.
We can say multitudes and mixtapes.
Yeah, exactly. We're all multitudes and mixtapes.
That's it. I've suddenly understood the meaning of life. Was there anything I'm assuming you've made a few notes. Was there anything that you've taken away from the conversation that is going to probably stick with you? Yeah,
absolutely. So I think the theme of community comes up quite consistently with the interview with Karishma. I know it's in some of our other interviews as well. And
it's in all the Drown in Sound interviews too.
Yeah, it is one of the most important themes of today. And I think it's because, you know, there's been probably a decade long, I would say it's intentional, but there's been a decade long plight of disrupting community, making people feel like they were a hyper individual, you know, using algorithms to separate people. We are less connected in person because we're tied to our technology. All of these things have happened. Some are intentional, some are maybe not as intentional. And so now we are realizing the danger that has caused, and we are suffering the real effect of it in people's mental health, in their ability to engage with society, with social justice movements, because we almost haven't been trained in what it means to be in community with other people. It can be sticky, it can be uncomfortable, it can involve, some forms of, in a way, conflict in order to understand people better, so that then you get closer. So this theme around community obviously came up with Karishma, and I think it's amazing that she has gone and found her community through standing up for what's right, and obviously then leaving the BBC. But I also think that, it's not, I think that you can still have, because I think maybe one of the takeaways I took from that is, I don't want any of the listeners to think that you work in a big institution, if you make a stand for something that your institution might not be happy with, you now need to leave and you're going to be completely cut off and you need to find a new community. So I hope that the listener doesn't think it has to be as black and white as that, that even if you were somebody who does decide to make a stand and you either leave an institution or you are, tackling something within your institution, which is equally important, there should be people there who, even in quiet and personal ways, can support you, even if they're not as loud as you. So I think that's maybe one thing that I wanted to mention, and that I've seen happen with lots of other people.
And who have you been?
So I'm Ariana. I'm the host here at Sounds Like Change. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you here. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to seeing you next time.